Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Dr. Travis Brown, what is This Medical Life all about?
This is the pursuit of knowledge as we learn about diseases from the ancient times to the present day. These are the stories of medicine.
Hello, it's Steve Davis here, and thanks for downloading this episode of This Medical Life. Dr. Travis Brown and I are taking a short break in producing episodes, but before we leave, we have one today that features two audio segments. The first of these is a 15-minute best-of compilation, which we're submitting to the Australian Podcast Awards in the hope that we win a gong or get some recognition for the important work of keeping GPs and specialists and medical students abreast of various diseases with the ability to dive deep into their history and to pick up on some of the latest insights from experts in the field. Then the second part is an example of some of the outreach that Dr. Travis Brown does beyond the medical fraternity, in which he translates some of the research and the stories we share in This Medical Life with a broader audience. In this case, he is being interviewed by Richard Pascoe on Adelaide's 5AA, which is a talkback station. And as you'll hear, he really touches the popular nerve in one of the stories we did on the history of methamphetamines. So we hope you enjoy this little goodie basket of audio snacks, and we'll be returning soon with some more content for you. In fact, there are a number of interviews already lined up, so we look forward to continuing This Medical Life.
Lynch syndrome story starts with Pauline Gross, and you've looked into her past. Can you tell us a bit more about her?
I feel like Pauline lives in these two worlds. She lives in the legendary history in my family, right? I mean, she came to me as a child as almost a myth that my grandmother told me this story that I had this great aunt. She had an aunt who foretold her own death, that she said to this pathologist, Dr. Alderworthen, she confessed to him. This is in 1895. You don't do this. You don't talk about cancer. You don't say the word. She says to him that she knows she's going to die early and she knows exactly how she's going to die. And he, of course, is intrigued and he wants to know more. And so then she explains to him this history in her family of occurrence after occurrence of bowel cancer and what she would have called womb cancer at the time, or uterine cancer. And then she also lives in this world of medical history, of, this history of medicine, where she's known as the seamstress, because obviously in medical papers, you're not naming these patients because they're case studies, but Worthen wrote about her and how she had told him these things and that she was very distressed and that he had been the one to ask her why. And the whole thing happened because she had been doing some mending for him. But he was if you've ever seen a photograph of this guy, he was very particular about the way he looked, just as he was very particular about research. One thing led to another. And I think the thing that a lot of times, we abbreviate in history in order to get to the heart of the story faster. But one thing that always gets overlooked is if you do the math that happens between the first and second paper that he wrote that included the family, and then the follow-up paper that Weller wrote later, it was 25 years these two had a working relationship. She was a collaborator. He really needed her, almost in a sense more than she needed him at the time, because there wasn't a whole lot he could do for her as far as advice, sadly, at that time.
So
So gout, has been a big disease in the past, and it was first really talked about in ancient Egypt. It's in the papyrus writings, and so it was known then. But it was a relatively rare disease, but it became much more common in the last number of centuries as people started drinking more and more alcohol and rich foods. And for a while, it was king of diseases, the disease of kings, because the kings could afford all the sugar that, originally sugar was very expensive, and they could afford the rich foods and the alcohol and the sugar. Then around 1900, sugar became a lot less expensive, available to the general public, to the common people. Yep. And with that, we started seeing a shift where gout started becoming particularly common in everybody. And over the last, 50 years, gout has continued to increase. Today, I think it affects like 9 million people in the U.S. Maybe 20 or so million people have high serum uric acids and are at risk for developing gout. And one of the very scary things that's happened just in the last few years, maybe 15% of people with high uric acids who don't have gout actually still have crystals in their joints. It's just that they're asymptomatic, or maybe it just causes like a twinge and they can miss it. But the other thing that happened, Steve, was they discovered that these crystals deposit in the kidneys and the blood vessels and the lung and the eyes and the skin. But the scariest thing is in the blood vessels. There are now several studies that suggest that these crystals are depositing in the aorta and the coronary arteries. And these crystals are pro-inflammatory. They tend to deposit in the plaques. And so it's becoming a very hot area of research and of great clinical importance, because gout is associated with increased cardiovascular mortality and increased cardiovascular disease and increased risk for heart attacks. There's a lot of concern that uric acid crystals may actually have a direct role in heart disease.
So how do you learn surgery? You learn on recently dead bodies. And so what happened was you get what we call Burking. Have you heard of Burking?
Isn't it a dance when you bend forward?
I'm not sure, but we have two men, one by the name of William Burke and the other one by William Hare. And an unusual opportunity presented itself when a tenant of William Hare, who was an elderly armed pensioner by the name of Old Donald, who died of natural causes but owed £4 to William Hare for his thing. They thought, well, how are we going to recoup this? They then got his coffin, filled it with tanning bark, and then took his body to the local medical school at Edinburgh. And they paid £7 and 10 shillings. They made quite a profit. A few months later, they found another tenant who was sick. But instead of waiting, Burke and Hare decided to go around there and expedite the death. And with some whiskey and after a few drinks, they restrained him and suffocated him and then sold him to the medical school. This went on for quite some time, and by the end of what happened, they had at least killed 16 people to sell to medical schools. And this killing act became known as burking.
Burking.
Medical schools and education found themselves in this weird black market that ended up causing this UK to pass the Anatomy Act in 1832. Extra little twist at the end is they both got caught. William Hare got immunity testifying against William Burke, who then, Burke was hung and...
sold body to medical schools. Right, there you go.
That's the irony of that.
We're talking about prion disease, we're talking about CJD and variant CJD. Look, can you tell us what are prions?
To answer that question, we've really got to go back to the origins of life. It sounds dramatic, but it's true. DNA is an incredible piece of nanotechnology. DNA is a code that sits within cells using amino base pairs that carries all the information of what a cell should be and what should do, indeed, who we are. But DNA didn't appear out of just nowhere. It evolved itself. And so it had to have precursors. And for DNA to work, it needs proteins. It needs proteins as the machinery to interpret their DNA, to carry out the instructions, even to code it. And so before DNA, there were kinds of proteins that were perhaps precursors to life, self-replicating proteins. And prions are self-replicating proteins that very likely pre-existed DNA. And indeed, because we evolved from this, we carry those proteins around with us. You could imagine cancer is where cells run rampant, out of control, with the wrong DNA. If the wrong protein starts to run rampant and out of control, we call that a prion disease.
How are they causing disease?
As you know, with cancer, a cell has instructions. It should grow to this point, but no more. It should do this, but not more. And if it loses those instructions and just suddenly goes nuts, then that's what a cancer is. Now, if a protein that doesn't need any DNA to tell it what to do starts replicating, then no one can tell it to stop. No one can control it. And so it just keeps on replicating and replicating. And with this illness called Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, CJD, it's the worst of the worst. Once the protein starts switching on, it just keeps on reproducing itself until the brain is dissolved. It's the equivalent of putting your brain in a blender. And the other big problem is that protein can't be sterilized. So you can't sterilize surgical equipment. Can't be done. So you can radiate them. You can do anything you want to them. You cannot stop or you cannot sterilize. So if there's a case of CJD in a neurosurgical case, they have to throw all the equipment out.
We'll do an experiment with you and with our listeners. I want to demonstrate the limitations of medicine.
By the way, this is a podcast for GPs and specialists. Just remember your audience. All right. Okay. So what was the question?
Do you enjoy music?
I love it.
You love it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm going to play you 3 clips, one at a time, and I want to get your experiences of this piece.
All right, let's have a listen. It had a cinematic feel to it of dread, but more anticipatory dread, as if the hero has come out of some dark forest and has behold before her or him this eerie new place they're about to enter, for which they need to be on guard. And there's little moments of hope that are threaded through it, but they're quickly chastened by the fact that there's also danger potentially lurking. Unknown, the unknown.
Let's play clip 2.
Oh, right. Okay. Here we go. Well, that was clearly, and I wonder if we've been taught this, that was in the key of sadness, that music. I actually pictured a despondent Beethoven sitting at the piano next to a window in one of those manors, and it's raining. You can't really see outside, it's just rain hitting the windows, and he's just sitting there playing with melancholy.
And the 3rd clip?
Are there proper answers for this?
No.
You've got that look. Okay. All right, let's have a listen. Oh, wow. That is the sweet spot. That's one of my most favourite types of music. That's New Orleans jazz, and it has got that slide to it, which could suggest that you're a few bottles deep into some Jim Beam or whatever might be the case, but not in a but still in a fairly reputable and just buoyant, if not buoyant state of mind, but happy to go with the flow as you're walking through the streets of New Orleans at 3 a.m. and not feeling a moment's tiredness or care, just bliss, subdued bliss.
Yep. And here's the thing about that. Music is emotional. The whole point behind it is people listen to music to enjoy it. Sometimes they use it to express themselves. There's a variety of reasons, and it expresses mood. Here's the problem. How do you measure that impact? Whilst you've said what you feel, how I, as an objective observer, measure that?
Were you able to?
No. And that's the point. And so, we can't measure emotions. We can measure response. How much did you like that? And you can say, I really enjoyed that, or I didn't. I loved it. I hated it.
You could tell no difference in my levels of enjoyment?
I can, but how do I measure that?
Okay.
And so and if you think about this from a medical perspective and from a scientific perspective, we don't measure how the patients feel.
There is a self-reporting scale they can use, but even then, that's subjective on their part, isn't it?
Exactly, and that's when you think about it, it won't be in the abstract. Could you imagine actually reading a scientific journal that turns around and says, and it made the patients feel pretty good?
$13.95, Adelaide's 5AA. This is Richard Pascoe.
Another weekend here on 5AA. The man I always enjoy talking to every week is Travis Brown. He promised us something really to make us feel better about this weekend. On the last one we did, we were talking about bleeding all over the floor and about platelets, which has got nothing to do with fish and chips. But this week what have we got, Travis?
Looking at a drug of addiction, amphetamine.
Okay, this will be controversial. But when have we ever steered away from this? So, yes.
Well, it shouldn't be too controversial. I'll give it that. But it has an amazing history, amphetamines. It actually goes back all the way into late 1800s when it was first synthesized. And when it was first synthesized, the person who created it didn't really think of it much significantly. But it wasn't until 1927 when it was re-synthesized is probably the word, by a person by the name of George Ailes. And he actually created it as an alternative medication to asthma medications, which wasn't very useful for him at the time.
I was going to say, well done to George.
Well, he was looking clearly for an asthma alternative medication, and this is what he created. So he created amphetamine, and he ended up testing it again on himself, as of course you do those days.
Yes.
And he noticed that the side effect gave him a feeling of well-being. And the test on asthmatic patients, well, there was a bit of an interest, but it increased their heart rate. It also increased their blood pressure. And so it was a bit of a mixed bag, and they did find that it was able to reverse anesthesia if they were going through it and increase their people's arousal, and also had a side effect though of making people a bit insomniac. So it ended up being taken up by a pharmaceutical company, and they created.
Sorry, Travis. I was just going to say there'll be regular listeners to this segment who've gone, how many jokes can Richard let go of at the moment? The poor guy, we'll put amphetamines, the last thing he would have gone along and thought, I've got asthma now. Nah, that's fine. It's all good. Everybody's happy. Sorry, Travis.
Well, that's right. This was a bit of a torture one for you.
Yeah.
But they ended up producing this drug called Benzedrine. And what they ended up finding was, they started to go, well, is this an antidepressant? Because it makes people pep up.
Yes.
It ended up, it is still used, narcolepsy. So people who have a disorder, who have trouble or going to, just fall asleep all the time, well, it's still actually prescribed today for people who have narcolepsy. But they actually started to use it as a decongestant. And when it was inhaled,
right,
it was a popular remedy.
Can I say right now,
cold.
I was just going to say, Travis and I are not promoting the use of drugs at the moment. Okay, we're talking about the history of this.
History.
Yes.
But it was a popular remedy for the cold, and they even found that people who didn't have a cold liked to take it as a remedy as well. So that was probably a bit of a red flag.
I wonder why.
Well, this was available over the counter up until 1935.
Right.
But the really interesting thing at this time was when World War II broke out, and German military ended up producing this in significant quantities. And in 1938, it was part of the Blitzkrieg that was making remarkable movement in the first 3 months. This was actually given to people in the troops, artillery, air power, and even dive bombers. And what they ended up doing in those first 3 months, there was remarkable advancement. And it was in large part, I'm sure, because they were given amphetamine. And during the first 3 months of that huge advancement, they used over 35 million tablets of amphetamine.
Really? Never would have guessed.
Well, that's the thing. Dive bombers would use it, and it was actually, they said it helped them maintain consciousness during the heavy, tremendous G forces, and they called them Stuka tablets.
Right.
And so it was. You can even see at about the same time, there is advertisements you can actually see online of them advertising things like methamphetamine, which helped cheerfulness and mindful alertness and optimism.
Yep.
And so the studies that they showed it reduced stress and improved intelligence testing and all these increased consciousness in students and academics and even medical professionals. And so whilst the Germans were in World War II were doing it, the Allies found out, and they ended up using them as well in 1946, and they called them energy pills. And it was estimated that British and American service personnel used over 150 million amphetamine pills during the time of the war.
That's just unbelievable. Why hasn't Quentin Tarantino made a movie about it? That's one of the big questions on there. The text line has gone berserk here at the moment. So yes,
yeah, these are part of it's just part of the war, and you'll see it if you actually go looking for it. But it is there. Then the problem is they talk about, because you have troops who are so hyped up on pills, first of all, they have problems sleeping, but second of all, it also gets into almost this psychotic state. Yep. And they talk about a lot of atrocities being caused potentially because of just the drug-fueled nature of the war. And so the amazing thing was it caused so many problems for the troops. But even into the 1960s, it was still considered an innocuous drug. It believed to help people from day-to-day activities. It gave this youthful vigor and weight loss. And even President John F. Kennedy had some methamphetamine injections with vitamins during his run. And again, it was considered in 1960s and 1970s. It was estimated that 5 to 6% of the American population over the age of 14 had amphetamine, a dose, at least in the last 6 months at that time. So this is how ubiquitous it was.
I'm just doing it, I've just done a quick Google search, and honestly, so it's stunning. It really is stunning how methamphetamine became a key part of Nazi military strategy.
That's right. And again, it's one of the, if you gave it to your troops to win a war, is that ethical is probably not the right word, but would you do that to win a war? And that's, it's just a hidden part that not many people know about. But looking at then 1960s, it's seen as an innocuous drug. It's not until the 1970s that the Drug Administration started to realize the negative impact that these drugs had. And it started to become regulated. But look, it's a big problem. But what they were talking about is that a lot of the, significant proportion of amphetamines that are still actually through pharmaceutical companies. So the street drug that people use is through the pharmaceuticals. So look, it's an amazing story about where amphetamines come from, what it was used from. It took us probably about 50 or 60 years, for us to realise the addictive nature and the real probably negative effects that it can have on people. And it's just it was a significant part of the war.
It's just absolutely amazing story. Really, it is. And we're not making light of this at all, people. So, if you just go along and do the research on there, it's just, it's like having a super soldier. Hang on. Didn't they do this to Captain America?
They certainly could have.
Yes. Well, they injected him with something which made him, grow and become muscular. Not that I've watched many Marvel films, just all of them, people, but that's fine. On there.
Well, the US, I have seen some of it where he gets into a chamber and he's very tiny, and then suddenly he's this muscular person, which is just incredible to see. So
here comes Chris Evans. So, they're saying Adolf Hitler himself frequently had his personal physician, Theodore Morell, inject him with Eucadol, a cocktail of oxycodone and speed.
But remember, they just thought it was a stimulant. It was a harmless stimulant. And so it would be like us today, in 20 or 30 years' time, people saying, well, caffeine turned out to be a terrible drug for everyone. Everyone's on it. Hang
on there, Travis. We won't have that kind of talk on this show. Good heavens as well. Honestly, people, listeners out there, have a look at some of the research on here, but just, according to Nicholas Rasmussen of the University of New South Wales, sounds like you made that name up, Nicholas, rumours in Britain regarding heavily drugged, fearless and berserk Nazi pilots with inhuman resistance flooded the UK's newspaper.
Yeah, no, and you'll see even pharmaceutical advertisements for things like refamphetamine or refatamine, which is literally what you would see as these old-style pharmaceutical ads of them saying, hey, I feel cheerful, better, in myself, and these are amphetamines that are advertised across either over the counter, depending on how far you go back, or pretty much the pharmaceutical, ask your GP if amphetamine is for you.
Wow.
So this is, again, we realise the negative effects of it, but yes, it's a powerful stimulant. One of those things why people use it, well, people use drugs because they work, and what people found is that, yes, but it had a very significant drawback and addiction that caused problems for people very much in the long term.
We're not making light of this, people, and for it's all written down. It's all history and things. A benzodrine inhaler.
Yeah.
Good. I mean, it's just
and this is and what people sort of forget is what we know now is not what we knew back then. And this is when you learn about things. And that's why we've got so many regulations these days, is because back then we didn't have them and we didn't know negative side effects. And that's why people talk about today about being able to get through, these heavily regulated areas. Well, it's because there was no regulation sometimes, and the things that we did caused so much harm. And so that's it's we're looking at history through history and just saying, wow, that's amazing to see how either naive or how not courageous not the word, probably how blind we were to the implications of medications like this.
The German armed forces used, I'm going to pronounce it wrong, people, it's called Pervitin. You can leave all the jokes there. To soldiers through tough nights, but it came at a cost. Colloquially called Panzer chocolate or tank chocolate, it's created mimic soda packaging to market the drug. Absolutely. Travis, stunning. And I've got to say on this part that I'm looking at on Google here, there are ads to build up your body halfway through it. So, well placed ads on there. It's just an amazing story. And Travis, where can we find out more about this?
So you can listen to my podcast, either the first series, This Pathological Life podcast, or second series, the current one is This Medical Life podcast. It's free available on any podcasting service or Spotify. Have a search, have a listen. These are some of the stories that come up.
Travis, thanks very much, and we'll hopefully talk to you next week.
Sounds great. Thanks very much for your time, Richard.
This Medical Life is recorded in the Talked About Marketing Studios in Adelaide. For show notes and more information about the podcast, visit thismedicallife.com.au. You can contact the hosts via Twitter. Dr. Travis Brown is at Dr. Travis Brown. That's DR for doctor. And Steve Davis is at Steve Davis. Editing and production is by Tim Whiffen. Design is by Tom Buzenjut. This has been a PathNotes Proprietary Limited production.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.